Hey everyone, this is Steve Corian from the PTC community, and I'm going to show you today how I manage my castings in Pro eWildFire 4.0. This is a simple casting that I made. It has 3mm radiuses on it. That's the extra machine stock that I decided to put on this casting. This casting is also going to have what's called a core. So when they cast it, there's going to be a hole through the middle of this. It basically cuts down on machine time. So I'm going to add my core now to the to my assembly. And you'll see that it's inside of it's just in my assembly right now. So what I want to do is I want to cut this core out of my casting, but I want it to be independent of my casting, meaning I don't want it to affect anything that I change on my casting at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my history tree over here, and I'm going to activate my casting, and I'm going to go up to Insert, Shared Data, Merge Inheritance, and up here it's asking me to select the part I want to cut from my casting. So I'm going to select my core and hit Subtract, and then I'm going to hit OK. Now when I activate the assembly, you're going to see that it's still there, and I'm going to show you how to work with that in a second. But if I go back to my casting part, if I open that up, you will see that now that shape is gone, and in the history tree over here on the left there's something called cutout ID 6330. That is essentially my core and has nothing to do with my casting at all. So I can take this and move it anywhere up the tree I want, and it will not affect my part at all. So this becomes useful when you're adding features to your part and you don't want them to cut through your core. And it's also really beneficial when you start making changes later on down the road. But typically what I end up doing when I have a core is I end up changing the color so that I know that that is my core. So I select the surfaces that are my core, and I change those colors to typically orange. That's just my preference. So now when I go into, I'm going to save this. When I go into my assembly, I don't want to see this core in my assembly. So what I do is I go to my layers and I create a new layer and I call it core. And you'll see up here on the right there's include, exclude. So if you flip your layer back, you can select your core and hit OK, and now that core is on a layer. So I can come back to my layers and I can hide that core, save the status, and now you don't see the core anymore through there like a solid. So but it's there obviously because you can see the cutaway. Now the machined part of this works the exact same way. You basically want to create an empty part, so that's what I'll do. Let me save my assembly. What I do is I already have one created. It's called Cap Casting Machine, and you'll see that this part is just empty. There's nothing in it, just planes. So I save that. I come back to my top assembly and I insert my cap casting machined part that's empty at the default location. So now I want to be able to take my casting part and I want to merge that into my casting, my machined part here. So I activate my machine part and I go to Insert, Shared Data, Merge Inheritance, and I select my casting. Now there's no cutaway because there's no part to cut away from, which is good because you just want the casting itself to be referenced. So I have now merged that part, the casting part, into my machine part. So let me open my machine part so you can see what it looks like. So now what you have is the casting with the core, and it's what's called a merge ID, okay? And you can open this, it's called open base. So now if I open the base, now what I have here is my casting part. So if I need to make changes, which I'll show you in a minute how this all ends up working out nice, it won't affect the machining. So I'm going to go back to my my assembly, and I'm going to take my you know what I'm going to do too here while we're at it. We're going to create another layer called casting, and I'm going to put the casting on that layer as well and hit OK. And the reason I do that is so that when the machining is in the assembly mode, I don't want to see the casting either. I just want to see the machined finished part. So I have all of that set up now on my layers so that these two parts are hidden, and you can't see them. This is actually the machined part, and I'll show you right now. We'll go make the machined part of this. We're going to open it, and we're going to do some machining. Now typically the best thing to do is to try and not constrain your part, your cuts, to the actual features of the casting, because if that changes, then your cut will change too with it. I mean, if you want that to happen, you can do it that way, but when you go to do a drawing, you're going to have a datum system, so you're going to want to come from wherever your coordinate system is going to be, which maybe would be your center here. So you can go in and delete your references that I just used. See, they're referencing the merge, and I can use my planes now to define where my cuts are actually taking place. I hope that makes sense. So now when I go into my drawing, everything is defined from my coordinate system for the machining. The casting model itself would be sent to the supplier to make. So you don't really need to make a drawing for the casting. So if your casting changes, you really don't want that to dictate your machining, because it's coming off your coordinate system. So I hope all of that kind of makes sense. But I do use edges as a reference, and then I delete those references and then constrain them from my datum, which would be my 0 here. So now I'm just going to use an equals and equal my radiuses. Hit OK. I'm going to subtract this 3 millimeters. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing on this face. So like I said, you're going to see me initially pick the outer circle as a reference, which is the casting, the merge ID. And then I'll end up going into my references, sketch references, and I will delete that reference. And then it's going to say, okay, well, you don't have enough references. So I will end up picking my planes, that will be my datum, and I'll hit OK. And this I'm actually going to make bigger. I'm going to make it 250. And I'm going to change the direction, hit 3, and subtract. Oh, maybe I didn't subtract that. There we go. So I'm basically just making my cuts now in my machine model. And I'm going to show you how all of this plays out in a minute. Let me delete that. This is the easiest way to locate, is use them as a reference first to determine where you exactly need to be, so you're on center, and then go in and delete those references so it comes back to your XYZ or your datum. So I'm going to go into Sketch References and delete anything that says merge, because that's the merge ID. When I get out of there, you're going to see all of these are strong. Okay. Through all, subtract. Oops. Okay, so I have one more cut to make, and that's going to be a revolve of the core, because the core is basically just a rough shape of what I want my internal shape to be. So I'm actually going to use an offset of 8. Where are you? I'm going to do my subtract, and there you have it. So what I end up doing with the machining now is I end up coloring my machine surfaces. Well, I typically color them blue, but you can color them, you know, whatever color you like, obviously, or prefer. Hit OK, apply, done. Okay, so now when I go back to my top assembly, file, save. Let me show you what it's going to look like. Now you'll notice that these are on. They're not. These two parts aren't in the hide mode, but they could be if you really wanted to. I mean, I'll set them like that so when I open it, I know they're on the hidden layer. But generally, this is how I have my part. Now, you'll notice that the machining is all done, and if I go into my casting part, there's no machine cuts, and that's because I use the merge inheritance tool. So now, if I want to change a size of something like the pads and hit 8, or say something like 10. And hit regenerate. Okay, you see that the pad grew in my casting. And when I come back to my assembly and I hit regenerate, it updated my machined part. So they're linked together, but they don't affect, the casting will not affect my machine part, and it's like they're independent but connected. So I hope this makes sense, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to rate and comment.